This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you very much for joining us on this presentation at the Visionary Days. We have Professor Alison Wakefield from the University of West London and the Security Institute in England. Thank you for joining us, Professor. And I leave the floor to you on talking on security in a complex world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I hope we're going to have a decent connection today. I think if there are any problems, please message Luca if you can, and he'll wave at me, and I'll see if I can do anything this end. I have the best broadband provider in the country, but it's still unreliable. So my name is Alison Wakefield. I teach at the University of West London, and I'm also chair of an organisation called the Security Institute. And as you can see, my presentation today is on security in a complex world. What I want to try to do today is make complexity simple. So we'll see at the end if I've achieved that aim. So just a quick bio. So we have a cybersecurity centre at the University of West London, and I'm part of that. And also teach security practitioners on a professional doctorate programme. The Security Institute's the UK's largest association for protective security professionals. We're about 3,500 members, and as most of us are in this day and age, spread across a range of different roles, and active in publishing and writing alongside that. So a book I've just completed has complexity as one of its core themes. And Luca told me I could do a little pitch for the university. So we're doing well in student satisfaction league tables, which we're very, very happy about. And for those with a security interest, we have a growing portfolio of courses in this area, so becoming one of the UK specialists in security education. So this is my agenda for the next hour or so. So I hopefully won't talk for an hour, and we'll leave some time for questions. But you know, I'll talk about the meaning of security, issues to do with our complex and uncertain world, and then introduce complexity thinking as a concept that you're probably hearing about more and more. Then moving on to how complex security challenges can be managed, and talking about the implications for practitioners of these issues. So this is my personal lens on security, by virtue of the breadth of my roles, teaching security studies in a university and leading a security institute. You see more and more of these different security disciplines coming together, and different sort of ways of seeing security, from the human security, which has a focus on people's basic needs, including access to food and healthcare, and a safe environment, through to very specific practical disciplines, such as some of the specific aspects of cybersecurity, like an information security, like application security or network security. It's a word that's really bandied around a lot in lots of different contexts, and has kind of rhetorical power as well. It's kind of one of the key themes of our age, of a complex world, and a product that's become very lucrative to sell. So coming from the Latin, in simple terms, meaning free from care, but you can look at it in lots of different ways. You know, an instrumental value as a means towards living a fulfilling life. not an end, not an end in itself. And what I mean by that is really, you know, it facilitates quality of life. Pursuing security to its end leads you potentially in a society that isn't very enjoyable to live in. And it's something that's relative as well. So going back to my previous point, undesirable in absolute terms, and in deciding how you weight security, you are making calculations and trade-offs in terms of the balance of freedom of security in the activities that you undertake. It can be viewed both objectively and subjectively. To some extent, we can measure our security, but in other ways, it's about how we feel. You know, we might be actually perfectly safe walking down a dark alleyway at night, but we might feel very uncomfortable. So security measures have to cater to both of those objectives. And it's both a passive condition in terms of being secure and an active process, as expressed in those countless security terms on the previous slide. And finally, big areas of debate, particularly in the discipline of international relations, relate to whose security are the focus of concern. And so this has led to debates about whether the focus should be human security, that is the security of the individual, or should security be regarded as you know, primarily the preserve of the state and measures organised around the needs of the state and maintaining sovereignty. Then there's also the question of, you know, what do we want to be secure from? So what constitutes a security threat? Should security include access to food and water and healthcare, or are we thinking more about security from violent threats, for example? And then finally, if you're asking security by what means, that alludes to what you might consider to be security measures. And since the end of the Cold War, there's been an increasing convergence in international security of security and development agendas. So a lot of humanitarian interventions try to stabilize and develop regions of the world that are regarded as sources of instability to the developed world. Now, I just wanted to introduce the concept of security governance, which is most commonly found in international relations scholarship. And as you can see from the quote, it's referring to the fact of multiple authorities coming together, perhaps across the public and private spheres, taking account of informal as well as formal measures, and working together to provide security. And if you think about the many different contexts in which you might find security, if you're considering security at the local level, the national, perhaps the corporate sphere, the maritime space, you know, cyberspace, even outer space, or look at particular issues. More and more, you're seeing more a proliferation of actors coming together, and what scholars often refer to as governance as opposed to government. So government being replaced in dealing with in kind of providing security in complex areas through a range of different bodies coming together. So that's a feature of an increasingly complex world. And so just to give you a little bit more background, this scholar refers to multiple forms of regulation. And these are some of the key thinkers who've stimulated this way of thinking. The political scientist Foucault, his ideas of governmentality and the disciplinary society, and the just as I've articulated here, really the dispersal of social control mechanisms beyond the state and through networks, and that becomes a way that the state can kind of outsource government through creating structures that bring different actors and even the public into social control. Castells is a theorist who's talked about the network society and sees our world today in that way, as governed through networks. And Rhodes, another political scientist who's really influenced this field, his work in the 90s was looking at the way that governance in Britain was changing and becoming more, bring more and more actors getting involved in forms of government through outsourcing, through networks, and this was becoming a more common approach to policy challenges of the modern era, often bringing different agencies, public sector, private sector, different areas of expertise together. So if you're familiar with any of these strategic intelligence reports, so we've got examples here from the European Union, France, Germany, the UK, and the United States. Increasingly, governments are undertaking massive strategic intelligence forecasting exercises to look at the vulnerabilities and the threats on the horizon. And these documents are currently going out as far as about 2045. It was noticeable, really, the shift between some of the last round of publications and the most recent ones, who were talking about our era today as an inflection point and a paradox, where there's opportunities that exceed those that have come before, but also much greater threats. And of course, we're experiencing the effects of that today with the COVID pandemic, and the World Economic Forum predicts an unsettled geopolitical landscape for the foreseeable future. So, these documents talk about how adaptations need to be made to address these kind of challenges. So one key point is becoming more innovative, more adaptable, more responsive, more proactive. The British Ministry of the Defence argues that this is necessary among all of those actors involved in governance. America's National Intelligence Council talks about the need for long-term thinking, as well as the need for multi-stakeholder dialogue and collaboration in order to address these major challenges like terrorism, cyber attack, and climate change in the coming decades. And they say that the ability to fulfill these objectives is going to be what separates the winners and losers in the global stage. And of course, for democratic societies, we are vulnerable to election cycles and short-term thinking, and it's a real challenge for Western democracies to adapt to this kind of approach. If you think about the COVID pandemic, that was no surprise to anybody. We'd had global epidemics before, and recognized the threat on the horizon, but still few countries and few organizations have been properly prepared for it. So what will countries do when something less predictable happens? So some of the thinkers on complexity use the concept of global catastrophic risks, or GCRs, and these are some of the examples that they give. So the next major issue on the horizon could relate to climate change. Artificial intelligence is a can of worms. what uses will that be put to, accidentally or maliciously? Biotechnological risks, pandemics predicted in this 2019 report, or nuclear events, for example, nuclear attacks. So what's distinctive about these types of risk is their complexity, their connectivity and cascading nature. They operate in an unpredictable, non-linear way. Change can happen very quickly, so that they're a real challenge for any kind of review. So complexity is something that academics in a variety of disciplines have been talking about since the 90s, and originally in the sciences, science and engineering, and it's borrowing ideas across disciplines. I mean, this has really become an interdisciplinary endeavor. So it's evolved from the study of complex systems and systems theory, and it might be considered a subset of systems theory that's particularly concerned with complex and nonlinear threats and organizations, and the interrelationship between components. And so, one example of how nonlinear dynamics work is that outputs aren't necessarily proportionate to inputs, as I say here. So some small change can have a profound outcome, which is captured in the idea of the butterfly effect. And the idea of a complex adaptive system is central to complexity thinking, and refers to the type of system that has these intricate interrelationships that can't be predicted, and nonlinear characteristics, multiple variables, adding up to some very complex systems and complex challenges. So examples of a complex adaptive system include our immune system, traffic systems, ecosystems, weather systems, and economies. And so they can go from the small scale, in the individual, right through to and we can criticize complexity theory as being so broad. You can't think much more than that as the overarching framework for complexity thinking. So some prefer to talk about complexity science or complexity research. And it's exciting because it's challenging disciplines, challenging divisions between disciplines, and bringing the social and natural sciences together. There's been much thought around complexity that doesn't necessarily fit into complexity theory as such, but has relevance and something to offer. So these are some of the world's most famous sociologists of recent decades. So you have David Harvey's idea of time-space compression, and that's been an outcome of globalization. As distances have shrunk, we can move around the world, we can contact people around the world so much more easily. It's made the world much smaller. Anthony Giddens, in his 1990 book Runaway World, that's a metaphor for the kind of chaotic nature of the present era. Castells again, the idea of the network society, with the ICT infrastructure being at the centre of today's network society. Bauman referred to our era as liquid modernity, as opposed to the more solid and stable character. The early industrialized era, and then Ulrich Beck presented the idea of the boomerang effect, and so that's represented in the example of environmental damage by organizations that then comes back to affect them through adverse impacts in the environment. My home discipline is criminology, so I just wanted to add, and bearing in mind that we can think about this, you know, at the individual level right through to the organizational and societal level. It has multiple applications. Even if we're talking about a relationship between a probation worker or a social worker with a client, and that the effect of those interactions within that person's perhaps chaotic world, and how you know, actions may work one way on one day and another way on another day, and there are all kinds of different dynamics at play in those interactions. So these authors argue that there's room for new thinking in criminology and criminal justice, drawing on complexity theory, that strikes that balance between prescriptive solutions and, you know, a completely laissez-faire approach. So again, recognizing the importance of adaptability. And they argue that this is a perspective that still accommodates the whole range of perspectives in criminology, the ways of seeing the world and the ways of measuring the world as an overarching framework that has that broad application. So international relations is one of the areas that's looked at this a little more, but it still hasn't become one of the major schools of thought in international relations, perhaps because it is still underdeveloped. But Rosenau is one of the thinkers who introduced complexity into the discipline, talking in his day about turbulence and fast-moving events, and the fact that scholars were not moving sufficiently quickly to update their analytic tools. So he, you know, instead of complexity, he uses turbulence as his metaphor, instead of something that's characterized by high complexity. And you know, reflecting a changing world, reflecting globalization, reflecting technological advancement. So he pointed to the value of working in a cross-disciplinary way, and considering tools developed in areas like physics. This scholar Chandler points out the limitations, however, in that there's still not much being offered in international relations scholarship around what the solutions actually look like. So we need to look more broadly for those solutions. So I'm just now going to run through a few concepts that are relevant to complexity thinking, not necessarily at the heart of so-called complexity theory, but again, part of that that wider way of thinking about complexity in a world that is becoming more and more complex. So wicked problems is one of the more well-known ideas because it's been around a long time. So basically they're talking about, Riddle and Weber are talking about there being no clear relationship between cause and effect and no linear solution. And this diagram illustrates the 10 key components of a wicked problem that they identify. They were actually coming at this from a town planning perspective. And then perhaps a rather clumsy alternative concept is the super wicked problem. These authors were interested in global warming specifically. So, you know, you can see how these 4 features would apply to those kind of issues. So time is running out, going back to the boomerang effect, those causing the problem also seek to provide a solution. There's weak or non-existent authority to address it. So with climate change, you're having, you know, there's an international collaborative effort to commit to change, the change that the planet needs, whilst really not going anywhere near far enough. And then also the fact that the likes of climate change is a sort of slowly unfolding crisis rather than an immediate emergency. And so decision makers, policy makers are unfortunately often pushing those issues into the future. Then VUCA is something that's popular in the business world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environments. So examples of that are, for example, nuclear settings, nuclear power stations, air traffic control systems. So very, very difficult to manage environments. And you've probably heard of black swans. So that's Nassim Nicholas Taleb's concept of the unpredictable, rare, and catastrophic event. So COVID is not that because it was so predictable. The idea of normal accidents theory, again, another older concept based on looking at systems that are tightly coupled and present more of a risk of failure, where the interconnectedness of parts of the system mean that there may be cascading effects. And then Taleb's other concept of anti-fragile, and this is really an important one. It refers to systems that actually become stronger under pressure, and based on the long-standing maxim of Nietzsche, what does not kill me makes me stronger, something that you see in the natural world. So, you know, potentially some of the answers are in this, the operationalization of this concept, that you know, how can we actually benefit from complexity? How can we do better than our competitors and make a positive out of this situation? So going back to the concept of governance then, so complexity theory is not just looking at complex problems, but complex structures of governance that respond to those challenges. And again, these are issues that can be at the lowest human level right through to the transnational sphere. And resilience thinking has a strong relationship with complexity thinking. So resilience thinking has become more and more influential in the last couple of decades, both internationally in terms of international development and nationally. And it's encouraged more partnership working, more holistic strategies. There's been a strong interest in resilience in international disaster risk strategies, with increasing focus in trying to provide humanitarian support in developing world contexts to help societies look after themselves better and be more resilient to shocks. However, if we think about the structures that we have for governing security, these are still characteristic really of earlier decades, still tend to be bureaucratic and fairly inflexible, and less equipped for complex challenges. And so these authors, who produce quite a useful report, argue that we must throw off the shackles of the old ways of thinking and embrace a complexity paradigm. That means really looking very carefully at how governance structures are designed. And practically speaking, they understand that you can't just throw old systems out. So they talk about how you can supplement inherited governance system design and practices with design principles that are better equipped to deal with global catastrophic risks and other complex risks. And they go into a bit more detail talking about what they mean by evolutionary design. So structures that are really adaptable. And of course, we have the benefit of big data and open data to allow us to understand problems better. So that capturing of intelligence is a major strand of what they recommend. They talk about the importance of transparency. So obviously, you have potentially catastrophic implications of governments hiding issues like pandemics, which slow the ability of the rest of the world to respond. And transparency can be a way of achieving governmental accountability, as in the case of the Paris Agreement targets on climate change. They talk about the importance of effective collaborative deliberative mechanisms. So, harnessing the actors that can contribute, and that may mean local communities and indigenous communities in certain contexts. And then measures that are adaptive to change, so won't be set in stone, where there is flexibility to have continuous learning, to allow for experimentation, the ability to change tack at some point when it appears that one approach isn't working or the risk has evolved. And then also adaptive system design. So designing systems that can be responsive to unintended consequences. So there's a little bit more in that report. So for the practitioner, so I don't know how many of the audience are security practitioners, but this is certainly something that security practitioners, as well as the executives they support, really need to think about, be better prepared for, start to learn about systems thinking and complexity thinking, recognizing the nature of many contemporary crises and the issues on the horizon. And as reflected in the idea of anti-fragility, we're going beyond resilience, which is about bouncing back from an event, to actually coming back stronger. So finding the positive in that event and using that event or the risks on the horizon to actually improve the way that the organization works. And then, just some more simple parameters of resilient organizations. So fostering cultures that are engage everyone in the organization in preparing for change, that can be flexible and adaptable. Having resilience plans that aren't set in stone, that are sufficiently adaptable to a variety of different scenarios, including scenarios that may not have been thought of. And also regularly testing and exercising so that the organization is prepared for the next challenge on the horizon and can get ahead of the competition. Thinking in the long term is essential. Organizations often have to be much more focused on the short term, but a risk that is considered relatively low likelihood from year to year, if you take a longer term view, it may be almost certain to happen. And I think, and again, we've seen that with COVID. The author of this short article, Paul Martin, is a psychologist by background, and he talks about various human limitations that prevent us from developing adaptable cultures and strategies. So optimism bias is a tendency to imagine the best of the situation. Present bias is about focusing on the issues of the present as opposed to worrying about the risks in the future. And confirmation bias is about being, really supporting ideas that confirm your own beliefs. So, these are human challenges that we need to recognize and overcome. We're a highly networked world, and the solutions are networked solutions. So nurturing good relations with others is essential, and recognizing complexity. So just to sum up then, just highlighted the contested nature of security, but the fact that whatever the dimension we're looking at, from the local right through to the international, or in different policy areas, we're seeing more and more actors having to be involved and come together to resolve those issues, as the challenges of the present are more complex than those of 50 to 100 years ago. And the major risks that the governments need to think about and organizations are likely to be the complex ones, where you have cascading effects, non-linear dynamics, rapidly changing circumstances, and potentially frequent surprises. So the thinking to help practitioners and policymakers and politicians start to try and respond to these issues, we'll find rich thinking across disciplines in complexity theory. And we must be mindful that typically existing security architectures are still not well equipped for complex challenges. And so as Pegram and Kleinkamp advocate, they're not proposing that we throw existing security architectures away, but need to supplement existing structures with design principles and practices that are oriented to dealing with complexity and global catastrophic risks. So it's over to the audience now. Are there any questions? Okay, I've just seen Paul's question. Thank you very much. So I mentioned about malicious or accidental misuse of AI. Who is or should be accountable for the consequences of such incidents? Or should it be down to the author, owner, creator? How should we establish governance around AI? Well, like you, I guess I see the problem more than the solution, because this is such a rapidly changing area. And we haven't done a terribly good job, have we, of managing the speed of change up to now. You know, as the technology advances more and more quickly, it's harder and harder for policymakers to actually create policy, create legislation, and catch up with the risks. So now I believe that quite rightly you identify a really difficult challenge there in working out how to deal with these kind of issues, because you know these may be technologies for which there is a lack of legislation or inadequate legislation. So you know I can't really offer very concrete answers to that, but you know, other than highlighting again that you know as a complex issue, it requires you know a multi-stakeholder approach to trying to work through this issue, and you know identify the nature of risk and the types of solutions that may exist.
Thank you very much, Alison. So, sorry, I thought actually I was muted by actually the organizer, but thank you very much for your answer. I think it's true. We are, I think, as technologists or geeks, I would say, we are more faced with some kind of slow motion from the administration, the government, the legislators, and also a lack of understanding of how technology is evolving so fast. And to establish some kind of governance is so hard to speak the right language in order to vulgarize it to the non-technical people. So that's why I'm always kind of, I mean, I'm an engineer, but always kind of confronted with the regulators, trying to make them understand what's the objective, how we can foster it, how we can accommodate, and at the same time in respect, in compliance with legislations. Unfortunately, as you rightly pointed, there's a lack of a legislation. There's a lack of, I wouldn't say a lack of governance, but a lack of understanding, which makes the life of techie people even harder, because techie people do advance very fast, have a visionary behavior, and that's the reason why I mean the Visionary Day is being organized as well. And to get all the different stakeholders to talk the same language, it's so hard. And I've been trying to advocate it for the last like 2 decades somehow as well, as probably you are. And I mean, technology is moving so fast, and it's changing so fast that administration, public sector is just there trying to catch up, but technical people move like at the pace of 200 miles per hour, whereas the legislation move at 10, and so there's always the gap is increasing. And I'm trying to find ways of communicating with legislators and to educate them, but it's hard. So I don't know whether there's some kind of like miracle solution that you can recommend to the global community or not, or some it's a magic solution.
Yeah, well, I think a sign that I must be getting old is I've kind of got to that stage in life where I'm thinking I'm not sure it's going to get any better than this. looking at the potential issues on the horizon, and you know, the pervasiveness of social media, and you know, the fact that so much life is now online. You know, and there are, if you look at the way that different countries conceive of the regulation of the internet, you know, there's a real divide between Western societies that support a free and open internet, and others, an increasing number of other countries who want to see more regulation, who have a more cybersecurity focused approach, you know, and also often want to reduce freedoms. But living in a kind of laissez-faire kind of environment is getting more and more risky and challenging. So, you know, I do think that less democratic countries may have the edge in the future if Western societies sort of don't wake up and aren't able to implement better long-term thinking.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. I think we are all working towards the same goal anyway.
Yeah, I mean, at least there's plenty of work for us for the next few decades.
True. Thank you, Alison.
My pleasure. Thanks for the question. Okay, I've got time to try and answer any more questions, or perhaps just invite comments. Got a message from Luca, our host, that he's having some audio issues. So I'll chair myself for the last few minutes. I mean, what kind of challenges do other audience members see associated with an increasingly complex world?
If there are no other people actually commenting, I may want to actually raise another one related to traditional or legacy systems, as well as actually humans. Older generation people are, how would I say that, are trying to catch up with technology. And I think that's the goal of the youngsters now. I mean, I'm considered like I'm an older generation person, though young at heart, and still trying to advocate and educate people. And the fact of teaching, because I also teach cybersecurity and investigation at universities, and trying to educate people, and it's all a matter of education. And I think the young generation now, we as older people need to educate the young generation to educate back the older generation,
Oh,
in order
absolutely.
to in order to make them, because they are fast in using technology.
Yeah.
They are visionary. They are definitely volatile. They are also uncertain. They are complex. They are ambiguous. They are totally the reflection of VUCA. And I think the fact that they understand very quickly, they need to slow down the pace in order to educate the older generation. And that's how the community should be working somehow, rather than to find new challenges, but make those challenges understandable by older people in order for them to adopt it and to accept it. You put one of the best example is that whenever you travel in China, you need to have a mobile phone to travel, because there's only payments through mobile phone. Whether you get to the public transportation, there's no like a booth to buy a paper ticket anymore. And so everyone needs to scan their QR code on the bus. And if you're a tourist, let's say even young generation tourist, you don't have the app, you're not taking the public transport. So
Wow.
it's moving fast, and it's I think it's all our generation needs to tell the younger generation to teach us and to vulgarize it. And I mean, that's
I am coming around to the idea that we've got more to learn from them than
correct.
we've not necessarily got to to teach them. And I think they'll certainly be better equipped for managing complexity than we are as a generation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they're fast thinker. And for them, mobile phone, I mean, for the generation Alpha, their mobile phone has always existed. Whereas in my time, it was more like typewriters. And obviously they say, typewriter, what's that? And obviously you say, yeah, that's the beginning of the computer. And then before that, there was only everything mechanical. And there was no like 5G or 4G or whatever. And it was like only mechanical.
Yeah.
But it's all about communication. It's all about education. Education is still education. Data is still data, whether it's electronic, traveling at the speed of light or at the speed of sound, is still data. One is always equal to one, whether it's being transmitted faster or slower. At the end of the day, it's still a one.
Yeah.
So that's my comment.
So that the message to the organizers is invite younger people next year.
Yes, definitely. I think a panel. Sorry, I think last time I was at a panel talking about promoting AI for the usage of like defense system, offensive and defending cybersecurity systems. Invited a bunch of students, graduate students, and also undergrad students, and they were fast in thinking of all the different scenarios, and we were learning from them. So we were having the head of like from a regulatory perspective and governance perspective, and they were from the scenario building perspective and how fast they could do it. If you ask them to build up a scenario with the click of like a 3-mouse click, then they have a scenario. Yeah, which is great. And then we as a community need to contain them in order to say, okay, don't go too fast. Think about all the different stakeholders. Think about all the consequences that such technology may have in terms of like human, in terms of workforce, in terms of job positions, and don't think that AI is going to get rid of all the jobs. No, AI is only supplementing. I mean, that's what I'm trying to advocate, supplementing humans rather than replacing humans.
Yeah. So just leading to changes in the nature of jobs.
Correct. Thank you.
Well, Paul, it's been great talking to you. Please send me a LinkedIn request.
I will,
And,
definitely.
and anybody else still on the webinar. I think Luca would like to close now. So could I just say thank you very much to the Visionary Day organisers for hosting me, and for the audience for taking time to come and listen. I can make the presentation available, so all of those long complex words that I was struggling to say in the presentation, you can have a copy if you like, which will just perhaps make things a little bit clearer. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Luca.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks very much, Luca.